Hi everyone, and welcome to a bit of a different episode. As you can see, we're not all here, so we have decided to do something a little bit different. You've seen potentially we have put up little videos before with content about our thoughts or some stuff that Becki has put together from our session 0 stuff. We have decided that we are going to do a little bit of something different today, in that we are going to do just basically a roundtable talk. We're going to talk about a specific topic and see the sort of ideas that come out from this. And we've kind of just picked one. We had a list and then I've come up with something and we've decided to go with the new one. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of a chat about the difference between, or our points of view on, I suppose, creating a character for your first session in a new campaign. Creating your character. Do you create a character for the story, effectively what you want to play and the story that you have in your head for your character, or do you create for the team? Do you create for the party? Do you fit into the required meta? Do you make sure that you have everything that you need and then you work out a story afterwards? This kind of, we realise, and don't get us wrong, we already realise that this is a swinging scale. This is not a black and white scale. This is definitely a swinging scale. But we're going out of our way to probably look at the black and white, if nothing else. And I'm going to start with my personal feeling, which is that the meter should be more towards the story. I always personally prefer creating characters that do not necessarily fit a party dynamic, but that I want to play, that I'm interested in playing, that I have a story for or an idea for. And generally speaking, after that, I will try and move myself towards helping the meta afterwards, if that is necessary, and potentially in play, rather than it being something that I will add to a character. This comes up a little bit because some of us have been creating characters, so it's a thing that we have to think about. And obviously, with these guys levelling up recently, they have been thinking about a similar sort of thing. Are they advancing their characters for their story, or are they advancing their characters for the meta of the team? So we are roundtabling this. We are literally just going to be probably talking over each other potentially, and we'll be backwards and forwards and all the rest of it. This is completely open chat. I've put my 2 pence in, and I'm sure it will be brought up and people can question me about it and how I feel about it as we go in. But I'm going to try and ringmaster this a little bit and make sure that there's not too much over the top of one another. And realistically, I want to see if anybody has any points, if anybody has any opinions on this and what they are. And Becky's waving her hand over there, so let's go with that first.
I'm so used to like Zoom, hands up. I think you added a second point there because you said about creating a character for story.
Yep.
And creating it for the party dynamic. But then you said about leveling up, and I hadn't twigged that actually when I leveled Neffy up, actually I've done that a bit.
Which way
I've done it to help the party. I mean, her level up worked, but I was thinking about her need for, like, I have detect magic, now I need identify because I'm the only one in the party who has detect magic. And so I did that to help. But actually, I wouldn't necessarily have chosen that otherwise. So it's now making me think. Go on.
Whereas Valen's advancements are, he's continuing being a herbalist and a healer, which on the one hand is useful for a party, but on the other hand, that's who he is. So, you know, the meta and the story there are running very, very parallel.
I have to admit, with Moz's, because there's already a video out with kind of how I feel about statting up a character. So I'm going to probably sit on about the 80% line on that one. So on the meta slide, though, I'm about 80% along the way there for it being individual versus group. Moz's advance is 90% personal, 10% useful. Because of how he thinks. He is threat orientated, or threat to civilization orientated, and so his choice of where he's going to go down, probably over the next couple of levels, of starting where he is going to be major threat concern, also what's coming up for him. So he's got to be a little bit selfish.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw a spanner in the works later because actually I have
Another one.
Yep, and absolutely another one.
Really?
I know, me of all people to do stuff like that. But so here's my feeling, and I will admit I do move more towards the meta as a game progresses, and that tends to be the way it happens. I tend to start with something which is very much my own creation, and then I start to put things in which will help groups and the like. But I have a reason for it, and I have a really really simple reason for this. Flaws in characters and flaws in groups are what make games interesting, and if you have designed a party and not a character, you're filling in for everybody's gaps. The story is going to be diminished. I think the fact that if you have things that you can fail at is as important as things that you can succeed at. And if you've just got everything crossed off in your group, you know, it's less interesting.
This is an attitude I take when I'm DMing D&D 5th Ed. I've long since given up on getting people to try and sort themselves out as a party so that they are all happy with the group composition. It's just play what you like, and if the party's deficient in some area, then get creative. Because that's highlighting exactly what you said, Matt. Because of my usual suspects for 5th Ed, I've got 2 players who will generally turn up with a tag team pair of characters that are built to work together, and they will play those characters no matter what situation, brief, anything. It's like, well, you know,
Okay.
go nuts. Because if the party doesn't have, for example, the person who picks locks and finds traps, well, life's going to get interesting. But we don't play these games for them to be boring.
No.
Come up with a solution. Long stick with a sandbag at the end. Solved. And the biggest, strongest, toughest character holds the stick. Set off the traps ahead and knock down the doors. Come up with your own solutions. Exactly. I mean, you can, even as a GM, you can then potentially look to tweak the universe around them a little bit, maybe to make it less hard. Or then again, you know, they make a rough on their backs and it's cool. Story. Story comes from adversity, not from ease.
And this is a lot of the reason why in my mind, certainly for Pathfinder, but other games that are out there, they do very, very similar stuff. They try and limit how many players you have. They try and recommend, they try and suggest, 4 is a good number, 5 is a good number. Don't go too much more than that, because ultimately if you go too much more than that, your party will cover absolutely every base, and there will be very, very little things that they cannot approach. And the only way then to really handle things is to increase the challenge ratings, to make things harder, but that can have an immediate deadly effect, and that is not necessarily fun either. Flaws in characters are a huge thing for me. I played a lot of role-playing games which force you to have flaws. They make you have things on your character sheet which are negatives that you have to handle. Now, whether or not you like your story railroaded that way, that is an entirely different question, perhaps. Or whether or not you like to build that dynamically, or you just like to have that as a thing in your background that your GM can approach and play havoc with. And believe me, I like the latter. I like my players giving me background that I can poke holes in, and I can find things to put into, and that's even for adventure paths. Having stuff written for people that isn't in the adventure path, but you can twist some of the adventure path or add things into the adventure path to make that more interesting, I think is a cool thing. But I did say I was going to put a spanner in the works. Here's the spanner. Do you think, and this is honestly, I have an opinion, but I'm not going to throw it out at everybody. Do you think it's easier for direct frontline problem solvers, as we have with Moz, to be more leaning towards their own personal story and their own personal development than it is for the support characters who potentially are there to deal with the meta side of the party?
Ooh. Who's going to go first, a support character or who feels they're a support character?
I'm the railroad, so...
Okay, I'm going to take that point and address it to a game I play on Tuesdays, which is Dark Heresy, and the DM has given us very strong hints that diversify your skill set.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the more direct characters haven't. I mean, if any of the Tuesday group are watching this, this is not meant as a direct criticism of you as players.
You suck.
But I'm talking about you.
In all seriousness, some of those players have gone, yeah, I have been a bit fixed on I am this person. I'm only going to buy things that take me in this direction. Why am I useless in every other situation? Where my character, in some circumstances, would be a direct problem solver. You know, their ranged combat ability is sufficient, but they've got a whole swath of social skill set to play with as well. Because I've not focused on combat, and it's usually on combat focused people who, you know, no, I'm doing my own thing to be this. I want that feat 10 levels hence. That is the you fart and annihilate everybody.
Shadow's got
really, I'm having to take medicine. Like, you know, you stick on the path of fart and annihilate everything.
I want to hear Becky's opinion because I got to turn around on that one. Go for Becky.
I think is a good point about this concept of diversifying in some way, or at least, even if your skill set is specific, at least having the role play to kind of play off in those situations. Like, for example, you might not be the most diplomatic character. Like, you don't have high society or, you know, in D&D, whatever the, you know, diplomacy or whatever. So therefore you can play the bumbling idiot in a social situation and make hilarious mistakes. And that creates fun as well. So it doesn't have to just be about the rolling of the dice and the encounter you're in. It's all about the other stuff as well.
I'm going to sneak in here. This is coming from the character, the rogue character, the one in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, who basically in the next couple of levels will have every skill at trained at least, because that's the way that rogues are in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. They just can do everything.
You know I'm going to roleplay it in some way.
So the rest of us can put
Extra pies.
Yeah.
The rogue, bless them, I have built myself a number of rogues in terms of just looking at how they're done, and as is well documented by at least two of the people in this chat, I am known for having a character of every single class, just in case I need one. And I've never ever managed to build a rogue which by 3rd level hasn't got every skill. It's just the way that rogues are in 2nd edition. Whether or not you need to put your feet up, that's another question, because of course they still have specialist skills, but they are trained in pretty much everything. So take your pick, but yeah, rogues are the jack of all trades in terms of skills, not necessarily in everything else.
I was going to roll around with Moz, sure, he's direct rather than classic support. But the other side is he is support to somebody else.
Mm.
Combat is a support role. For example, if we do need to get in or out of a place, the primary is going to be the rogue for breaking and entering or breaking and exiting. To twist that, combat's going to be a support role because it may come down to it needing finesse, but holding something off. That's not a direct. That's a supporting role at that point.
Yeah.
So,
Very true.
as much as physicality versus a magical utility, you've got physical utility to an extent. I mean, bashing down doors, yes, it's technically combat. But there are specific
Bouncing
feats,
off doors.
For example, bouncing off doors, exactly. There are feats in Pathfinder that make combat a utility. Because there are feats that allow you to attack doors, for example, generally speaking, more effectively. So you can diversify down a narrow corridor. You can balance weaknesses that may be present.
Yeah.
But I would agree, combat as a direct option sometimes is more of a direct primary.
Yeah. And
But that's because people default to violence.
there is that.
That's what like all tabletop games are, isn't it? Just default to, oh, here's this situation, we'll just fight our way out of it.
Murderous kleptomaniacs, the standard default alignment.
Murder
Mhm.
hobos.
Murder hobos.
Yeah.
But
I have never been a murder hobo.
Oh, I built a specific murder hobo, but I'll talk about that. But on the whole story versus meta, I think you can't be 100% story, or rather, you can as long as your story's not a completely selfish one. Because over the years, we've all met the person who wants to play the I am the dark, mysterious stranger who sits in the corner and doesn't talk to anyone. Why is nobody talking to me? Well, that's your story, pal. But you're no fun to roleplay with.
My family was killed by goblins and I have my father's sword. Yes, we've all met one of them.
Yeah.
And if you
And
haven't
we'll
met them,
admit
take a
playing
long, hard
them.
look at yourself.
Yes. Did you play them?
No, not
Don't get me wrong. There is a reason why the old-fashioned standard composition of a party is a fighter, a wizard, a cleric, and a rogue. There is a reason why that is still the staple. It is a reason why it is still the recommendation for like introducing people to the games and all the rest of it. Is you have the 4 base classes because they cover everybody's bases. They complement each other. They give you a range of things that you can role play, and you can still. And this is important for us to put out there. This is our opinion. You 100% can have a party that has a lot of story that conforms completely to meta and has worked and been built to do that. You can 100% do that. There is no issues with that. It doesn't take necessarily any more work. It's just, in my personal opinion, if I'm going to play a character for 3 years, 4 years, I want to start with the story. That's how I want to start. And that,
you need the engagement.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
To jump briefly into what's coming up, we're a number of us are putting together characters with a story that aligns on an axis with each other.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, we may as well say it right now because Dave's here going confused, going, what on earth are they talking about? We are building characters for another AP. We are building them not for this channel. We have been asked in by Heavyweight Gaming to put together a party, and it was very much sort of thrown up in the air to a very specific group of people, and then we've dragged one person in because they are what I would classify as the Pathfinder 2 experienced crew. And one extra, yes, to do this because functionally in a rather interesting twist of circumstances. Unlike this group where I've pulled in a couple of people and some new players, this is a new GM wanting experienced players in. So we had a conflab very briefly with my initial "what about these people?" and every single one of them said yes. So it was like, well, there we go. We've got a group. And so we've been building characters, and I suppose the interesting thing here is the story to keep us together as a group is built into the adventure.
Yes.
Unlike this one, where potentially a group can form and then completely disintegrate because there's nothing really driving them forwards, there is a very strict story in the AP that we're doing, and we are building characters first, and then we are integrating them second. That's how we've decided to do it, which is going to be
There's a
fun.
very small population pool, isn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested, we're looking at Quest for the Frozen Flame, which is the most recent AP that's just come out. So it should be entertaining and fun. But yeah, there's a lot of this sort of conversation, certainly in my head, came from the fact that we have been very anti-meta. In fact, the group is, I think the only thing that we said amongst the five of us when we were building these characters was, we need to have some people that are frontline, and then everybody can be anything else. And we sort of went that way, and that's it.
Yeah, I have no idea what mix of a skill set we have. I know what I built, and then that's about it.
I've been keeping a track on it. It's going to be epic, one way or the other. It'll be awesome.
Namely through our own death.
Yep.
So yeah.
But that creates so much more fun. Like you were saying about, like, you know, having flaws built in. Like I was building a character on Sunday for Legend of Five Rings, and that has your advantages and your disadvantages. And I was just looking at my sheet going, yeah, I got some really good advantages. But I'm also soft-hearted, so I'm not going to do well with any death around me. I have a lost love, and anyone that brings it up, it puts me into full waves of depression. That's in the description. And I'm also haunted, but I'm haunted at the highest level. So, like, multiple times during a session, like, my ancestors will turn up. But as a benefit, I also have, a friendly cami. So I'm haunted, but I also have friendly camis. So I'm just going to be a basket case by the end of it. But I also have to be really dignified as a courtier, which I think is going to be hilarious. That's not even including my skills in it.
I mean, that's certainly going with the idea of
that works.
Yeah, that's definitely going story in front of whether or not you fit with the group.
Mm-hmm.
But,
oh god, yeah.
I mean, going back to this group that we're building, that meta that I talked about, the fighter, wizard, cleric, rogue. Well, we've got one of those. We've got a cleric. We haven't got any of the other three. So
that's because there's what? How many archetypes? Archetypes in Pathfinder now. It's
classes,
very easy to not have.
There are 20 classes, I believe, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition now.
Again,
with 2 more coming.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good old number, and yeah, there is a lot of diversity in that. And don't get me wrong. There are other games where there is plenty of diversity and you don't have to fulfill the meta in any way, shape or form. I think, to be brutally honest with you, it's possibly harder in 5th Ed to cover every base, because I don't think you get a lot of good skills, effectively. Each character maybe gets 3 good skills that they're particularly good at, and everything else is just off your base stat.
Bards will always be a pain in the bum, because bards can spread things around like that. Also like that. And rogues can as well. Rogues can kick it about a bit as well. Potentially with your subclasses. It's when you get into the subclasses you can really start picking up broad spectrum skills.
Yeah.
I mean, going back to a wizard, a fighter, a healer, a cleric, wizard, a fighter, a cleric, and a rogue. That's where you started off with D&D. Did you have more classes?
Yes,
classes?
they did.
Elf
they
and
did.
dwarf.
Elf and dwarf were classes.
Elf and dwarf, sorry. And then then you start to spread out into other things. I mean, you can potentially boil down all your Pathfinder classes down into those. I'm playing a witch, which functionally could be reasonably boiled down into wizard. It's just Paizo have split the flavor. So you've got learned versus that, and then you've got cleric, which can be potentially non-fighter, more leaning on the priestly side. So is a soft-skinned caster, which could be pushed into. So you can, if you want to, bracket the groups still as frontline or support,
Yeah.
or sneak.
And to be fair, Pathfinder does do that. They are acutely aware of two definitions that they have in their system, which is martial classes and fundamentally caster or non-martial classes. They're very much, and everything is split into those two packs. And in a lot of cases, the simple way you can define whether or not something is a martial class or not is, do they have martial weapon proficiency at first level? If you don't, you are not a martial class. If you do, you're a martial class, and that's basically how they've done it. Okay, so should we do a sort of general summary for each person on how you sort of view this? Where is your sweet spot in terms of the swing, the meta swing, or whatever we want to call it? Where would you say the sweet spot is for you creating characters, but potentially also what you would recommend when people are creating characters? And very much not the experienced people, the new people. If you are a new person coming in, where would you tell people to shoot for in terms of story against meta? I'm going to start with Dave because he's been sat there quietly.
For once in my life. I would say probably aim for about 75% story, 25% meta. Because you've got to have a character you're engaged with, but it's got to be a character that can bring something to the group. And even if that group hasn't been formed, but I'm going to play a cleric. A cleric is used in a group. But this is how my cleric works. Or my murder hobo character. This is a really nasty warlock who kills for pleasure. But they're smart enough to only kill bad guys and do heroic things.
Played that warlock.
So they're entirely engaged in their own story, but they bring some stabbing and shooting to a party dynamic. They're a good second line ranged melee.
Go for Becki. Go on, Becki.
It depends, because right, if you're completely new, I'd say 50-50 it. As a group, sit down and work it out as a group. So you have some story, but you have some meta because you're learning the mechanics of the game. I think, bearing in mind I'm probably the newest to tabletop, you know, it's taken me a little while. Now I'm probably like 80-90% story based, and it's like, hey, if it fits in with the meta, great, but that's not what I'm aiming for, and actually that will create more hilarity down the line. So I've kind of moved completely away from my original because I was always meta from the start. So, but it depends on how confident a person is in playing a character. You know, you might have people who are improv, you know, people who have done drama their whole life, and so they're quite happy to roll with whatever comes their way, and so actually they want to go down the storyline, and then they're learning the mechanics and not worrying about too much. So it depends on the person. I appreciate that's a really wishy-washy response, but
No, it's not that
That
bad.
makes sense.
Yep. JJ?
I'm probably going to lean into what Becki said a bit, actually, there. Paizo make it a little bit easier than other games companies. When it comes to, you've got the player guide versus the GM's guide for any adventure path. Leaning on the quest one that we're going to be doing, Quest for the Frozen Flame, it tells you the players are going to be doing this as a thing. So you all know, as a group, well, we're all going to be doing that with that kind of end game in mind. So everyone's going to be leaning into that for a chunk. Something like that makes it awesome for new players.
Mm-hmm.
And then they can effectively go towards that 50-50 side of, we'll make a healthy amount blend, but this looks shiny and interesting. So I'd like to go on this, but we're going to make it work for everyone.
Yeah.
And then you lean into the utter maniacal chaos that is, you've got all the experience, you all read the player brief, and you all go, yeah, but I really like this thing over here. And you just go, okay, I'm doing 90% this crazy shenanigan. Well, he's going to come along here, and we will bend the universe to make that line fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll sit on 80-20 because it's somewhere between the 1950.
Just from my perspective, as a GM, functionally as a focus, I can always do my darndest to fit in anything. And I don't think new players should ever be fearful, unless you've got like new players and a new GM. You should never be fearful of throwing something at your GM that they have to think about, because they're there to run your story as much as anything else. They're there for your game, which does sometimes put a lot on GMs, but you know, there are some responsibilities you take on as a GM, and welcome to that. So I would always suggest, certainly for completely new players, absolutely 100% new players, I would sit them all around the table and do a session 0 and let them choose where they're happy to fall. If they want to sit and chat about every skill that they are taking and make sure that they're covering every single one of their bases, cool. Not a problem. If they sit round that table session 0 and they're all overlapping skills, but they're so excited about this Arakai druid of the fire order that they're coming up with, and you're sat there thinking, great, but you're all going to be in Antarctica for this adventure, so that's going to be entertaining for you. Let them go for it. The core thing from my perspective, new players should always do a session 0. 100%. You should never ever just dump them into the adventure with their characters. Always give them a session 0. As players progress and they become more experienced, then I think the amount of story that you should have for your characters should increase, and how it fits into the party should be something that you can do. As we're doing it in the one that we're about to take part in, we're having a kind of session 0-ish, where we're going to talk about our backgrounds and deliberately merge and mix the characters' stories together so that they have impact and they have connection to one another. We're doing that in advance. If they don't want to do that and just swing in a character at the last second, which I have had some things do, you know, other games I've had people that know nothing about one another and they have to be a party by the end of the first session. But I prefer my players, who are experienced players, to have that freedom of expression of who they want to play. And so me personally, as I am now, I lean more sort of 80-20. I will try and do a little bit to fit into the group, but mostly I won't. Mostly I'm going to play the character I want to play, and I'm going to build a story that I want for that one. So that's the kind of position I'm in terms of the stuff. And I will always state this for the record. One of my core beliefs is you can do anything you want in a party. For goodness sake, Paizo have written a one-shot where all 4 characters are gunslingers. There is no other characters in that entire group, and it is a pre-written adventure that they've got with pre-generated characters. Everybody plays a gunslinger. If you can do that, you can do anything.
Yeah, it all depends on the story you're on. That's solid. I mean, it flavors a story, definitely, as well. It gives you a very specific storyline compared to a blended group that goes and does the same objective.
Yeah. And JJ's right. Paizo do a lot when they're doing their pre-written stuff, their AP specifically, where people are allowed to generate the characters they want, because they will put out something before anything is released which tells you this is roughly where you are, this is the community you're part of, these are the traits or the backgrounds that you should realistically consider picking from, because they will help, the backgrounds themselves will help you form a story and bring you into this adventure. This is kind of the people that you're going to meet. This is roughly where you're headed. And it gives you a lot of the building blocks to then bolt your background onto, which in a lot of cases, good character creation, when you're talking about something that does story first, your background should inform your character, not the other way around. And going back to Legend of the Five Rings, the 20 questions, which is a system that I've always liked, where they ask you a whole bunch of questions about who your character is and what they're like, and it's got nothing to do with the stats until later on, where it says, considering what you picked here, this might be where you want to head with your stats. So yeah, 20 question systems, there's quite a few of them out there. It's worth looking at loads of systems, always is, because they all do it different. But I think we've talked about this for just over half an hour. Do you think we should go and call this one off and grab a drink and maybe start another one?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good.
Good to me, boss.
Catch you around, everybody else. I've got no name for what on earth this playlist is going to be with us rambling like this, but we'll come up with something.
The randoms of the random encounters.
Well, yeah, the randoms of the randoms.
Random square. Random square.
So, yeah. Anyway, we'll see you in a few minutes for us, but it'll be whenever it is when we release this for you guys. Bye-bye.
I don't know.